students, and welcome to a new episode. This is Target English Grade 9 covering episode 19, Module 2 of Unit 5, in which we will be focusing on grammar. In today's episode, we are going to look at 4 important topics. We will start with the present and the past passive as a revision, followed by the present continuous passive. We will also look at the past continuous passive, and finally the passive voice with modals. So let's start. Before we understand or go in details with the present and the past continuous passive, let's understand what's the difference between an active voice and a passive voice. Well, an active voice or an active sentence is direct and clear. It means that a sentence has a subject that acts upon its verb. The subject actually performs the verb's action. However, with the passive voice, it means that the subject is the recipient of an action. In other words, when the subject is acted on the verb, and sometimes it is not clear or not given who the subject is. Let's take an example for an active voice. Monkeys adore bananas. We have our subject, monkeys, verb, adore, bananas, object. As you can see, we're going to follow an SVO pattern here. Let's take another example. The cashier counted the money. Where's our subject? Excellent, the cashier. What about the verb? Counted. Excellent. And the object? The money. So the subject here performed the verb's action. When it comes to the passive voice, let's take the same examples and see how they are written in the passive voice. You have bananas are adored by monkeys. What did we start here? We started with something else. We started with the object, followed by the verb, followed by the subject. So we switched the place of the subject and the object. Money is counted by the cashier. Same thing. We started with the object, money, counted, our verb, and finally cashier, our subject. Now, to form an active sentence, how do we do that? We start with the subject, followed by verb, followed by object. As I said, SVO pattern. What if I want to form a passive sentence? I will bring the object at the beginning of the sentence and I will start with the object, followed by form of verb to be, followed by the past participle verb 3, followed by subject. Now, what did I do here? There are 2 main important things that you need to use when writing a passive sentence. They are verb to be and the past participle verb 3. Without them, you won't have a passive sentence. Let's look at an example of an active sentence. Subject, we said, you have the verb base form and the object. With the passive, we said you start with the object, followed by is or are, which are forms of verb to be, followed by past participle verb 3, and finally by subject. So it's by the subject itself. Let's look at this example. The boy eats an apple every day. What if I want to write it in the passive or change it to passive? I'm going to start with what? The subject? No, I'm going to start with the object. Where's our object in the sentence here? An apple. Good job. An apple is eaten by the boy. Verb to be is, followed by the past participle eaten. And finally, our subject. You have by and then the subject. Factories produce different kinds of air pollutants. Again, I want to write it in the passive form. Different kinds of air pollutants. That's my object here. Are, verb to be, produced by factories. Produced is my verb 3. And finally, I end it with the subject, by subject. Now, with the past simple, for the passive, I start with the subject followed by the verb, the second form, because it's in the past. So, just now we looked at the present simple passive. With the past simple passive, it's the same, but with the verb, you're not going to use the base form, you're going to use the second form. For the passive past simple sentence, you will start with the object, so always start with the object, followed by was or were, which are forms of verb to be, as you remember, followed by past participle, and finally by subject. Let's look at an example. The girl bought a new dress yesterday. That's an active past simple sentence. We want to change it into passive. What do? We start with the object, and we have two things in the sentence, remember? Yes, the object here is a new dress. Was bought, was, verb to be, bought, past participle, and the subject by, the subject, the girl. Another example, my brother collected beautiful shells last Friday. We want to change it into passive. We start with the good, object. Beautiful shells were, verb to be, collected, our past participle here, and by my brother, which is the subject. Now that we've covered the past simple and the present simple with active and passive sentences, it's time to look at the present continuous when forming active and passive sentences. With the present continuous, when you have an active sentence, you start with the subject, followed by am, is, or are, followed by verb ing, followed by object. Clear, direct, active sentence. However, I want to use the passive for the present continuous. What do? I start with the object, followed by am, is, are, followed by being. You have to add being in the passive sentence for present continuous. Then followed by the past participle verb 3, followed by the subject. Let's look at the following examples. Let's look at the active sentence. Ali is fixing the bike now, present continuous. I want to change it into passive. What do? I start with the subject, the bike, followed by is, which is form of verb to be, followed by being. And fixed is our verb 3. And finally, we have the subject. It is important to include being in your sentence because without it, it's no longer a passive sentence. Let's look at another example. The students are preparing some projects. I want to change it into passive. Some projects, my object here, are being prepared by the students. Can we locate verb to be? Yes, we have are, being, which is very important in our passive sentence, prepared, verb 3, and the subject by the students. Now that we've covered the present continuous, let's look at the past continuous. It is generally the same idea. We're just going to change one thing. With an active sentence, you have subject, was, were, verb ing, followed by object. However, with a passive sentence, you will start with the object first, followed by was, were. So we just change the forms of verb to be because it's the past continuous. Followed by being, past participle verb 3, and you will end with by the subject. Let's look at these examples. My father was painting the house. I want to change it into passive. I start with the object. Where's the object in the sentence? Excellent, the house. So the house was being painted by my father. We have the object, the house, was verb to be, being, followed by verb 3, and finally by the subject. Let's take a look at another example. Ahmed was taking a lot of photos. Can you locate the object so we can start our passive sentence? Yes, photos, a lot of photos were being taken by Ahmed. A lot of photos, our object, were verb to be, followed by being, followed by the verb 3, taken, and finally by the subject. Now that we've covered the present continuous and the past continuous with active and passive sentences, let's look at how to do the same thing with modal verbs. Modal verbs include shall, must, could, might, will, ought to, may, would, should, and can. So, what's an active sentence using a modal verb? You start with the subject, followed by a modal verb, followed by the verb infinitive form, and the object. Direct and clear. What if I have the passive voice? How can I form the sentence? Always start with the object. So we're going to start with the object, followed by our modal verb, and I add something here, be, followed by past participle verb 3, and finally by the subject. So we did two things. We added be and we changed the verb infinitive to past participle verb 3. Let's look at an example. The mother will bake cakes for the kids. Where's the object in the sentence? Excellent. Cakes. So we will start with that for our passive sentence. Cakes will be baked by the mother. Will is our modal verb. Don't forget to include be, followed by verb 3, past participle, and finally by the subject. Now it's time for some practice. The task tells you to change the following sentences into passive. Number 1, chimneys emit a lot of smoke into the air. Read the sentence carefully, try to analyze it and understand how are you going to change it into passive. What are we going to start with? Excellent, the object. So, a lot of smoke is emitted into the air by chimneys, followed by verb to be, followed by verb 3, past participle. Number 2, in the past, people overused natural resources. Let's identify the sentence. I know it's a past simple sentence, so how I'm going to change it into a passive. Natural resources were overused in the past by people. We began with the object, followed by verb to be, followed by verb 3. Number 3, nowadays scientists are exploring new sources of energy. Before we change into passive, let's understand what's the tense being used in the sentence. Is it the present simple? No, it's the present continuous. So how am I going to change it into passive? So the answer will be new sources of energy are being explored nowadays by scientists. So we started with the object, followed by verb to be, followed by being, and past participle 3. Number 4, Ahmed is collecting money for a charity. Before we change into passive, let's identify the tense of this sentence. Is it the present simple? No, it's the present continuous. Good. So let's change it into passive. We start with the object. Money is being collected for a charity by Ahmed. You have the object followed by verb to be, being, and finally verb 3, past participle. Number 5, you must not drop litter in the street. I have a modal here. How can I change it into passive? Litter must not be dropped in the street. started with the object, followed by mustn't, which is our modal, be, and finally dropped, which is the verb 3 past participle. Number 6, Sarah will learn the irregular verbs by heart. Again, another modal here, will. How can I change it into passive? Good. You will start with your object. The irregular verbs will be learned by heart by Sarah. So do you see the pattern that we used here? Number 7. Someone was building the wall when I was there. Let's identify the tense of the sentence. Is it in the past simple? No, it's in the past continuous. So it's different than the past simple. So our passive sentence will be, the wall was being built by someone when I was there. Again, you start with the object, followed by was, form of verb to be, being, and verb 3, which is the past participle. In today's episode, we revised the present simple and the past simple passive. We learned how to make present continuous passive. We learned how to make past continuous passive, and we learned how to form passive with modals. And thank you for watching.